In after the new home was built, we vacated the cabin, and really from about 1950 until about 1965, the cabin sat there pretty much vacant. After all, people were not anxious to live in a building that had no running water, plumbing, or any of that kind of thing, so it was understandable why it was vacant. As we were growing and completing high school, going off to school, everybody was busy, and the cabin sat there without any care. Well, buildings of that age don't last if they are not cared for. It began to deteriorate rather seriously. The roof was in, part of the roof was in bad shape. And here we have a picture that was taken in about 1965, before any restoration was completed on the cabin. As you can see, this was a pretty desolate looking piece of building at that time. So we kept saying that we needed to restore and maintain this cabin. We thought that really if we just replaced the roof on it, it would be in great shape. Well, as we got into it, we found there was a lot of work that needed to be done. We pondered over it, we thought about it, we discussed it with various people. Some people thought when they'd come to look at it, workers would come to look at it, that we had really lost our mind in thinking about restoring this cabin. Some suggestions were, light a match to it. Others said, I wouldn't touch that for anything. You guys must be foolish. Well, we were determined. We were determined that there was such a great history to this land that it sat on, the building, and the people who emigrated to this country, their blood, sweat, and tears to make that trip, to establish a home in America. We thought it was our duty to do our best to restore it. Said that, we completely ended up making drawings, photos of the cabin, and finally dismantled it completely, saving all the good logs, measuring for new ones. We made the decision to try to restore it as completely, as near as it was when it was originally built. We had to have specifically logs cut to fit where they belonged, where the ones, particularly towards the bottom where there was a poor foundation or no foundation, to be cut and fit into that location. There were parts of the roof that required special rafters, special size rafters. We had a sawmill make those, copied the original ones completely. So getting people, workers who were acquainted with this kind of work was very difficult to find, and who could, a regular carpenter didn't understand how you build and restore a cabin. But we finally found people who were quite frankly, lived nearby, and we went at it and spent weekends and holidays working at it with these people, and restored it from top to bottom. New logs, new foundation, new flooring, new roof, new doors, all built to as closely as possible to what it was in its original state. So from this picture of this cabin here, after dismantling it and coming back and acquiring new logs, new foundation, my mother was still alive and living in New Baltimore. She kept saying to us, when are you going to get that place done up there? I want to come back up and stay overnight one night. Well, this picture was taken in, I think, about March. It was a cool, cold, windy day in March. My brother Mike and I met there, brought my mother there, and this was the day that picture was taken. The exterior of the building was all up, but as you can see, the windows and doors had not been replaced. I might add that the neighbors and friends who lived in the area who thought we were rather foolish to start this endeavor, some even said we were really crazy. As it started to come back up in its new form, copying what it was with new windows, new logs, some new logs, new roof, the attitude of people changed dramatically. They would stop on the road, they would back up, they would get out of their car, come over and say, "That looks terrific. Where did you do?" So that was so gratifying to get those kind of get that kind of reaction. So from there we completed the work, cleaned up the yards, planted a few trees, planted a little grass, but nevertheless it was sitting out here on a country gravel road without any of us. Our family had become dispersed across the country pretty much, and although we were proud of the cabin, there was nobody nearby, real nearby, in our family to care for it. And of course we begun to have some vandalism, which was too bad, but that's life today. Sometime after that, we became acquainted with the Richmond Historical Society. They were a group of people who had gathered themselves together in Richmond and were bringing historic buildings to the Beebe Park in the city of Richmond and wanted to acquire the cabin. After considerable discussion, we reluctantly at first wanted to give the cabin to the Historical Society, but we would prefer that it be left on this land since John Donley emigrated here 150 years before that. After a second round of vandalism, my brothers and I sat down and said, you know, we better reconsider that decision. We went back to the Historical Society and came to an agreement with them and presented it to them in 1998. Now, the cabin was then moved from its resting place on the 29-mile road to Beebe Park in Richmond and settled in on a new foundation. We think the care and activity that's going on in the cabin, in the school, and in the train station is wonderful for the history of this area. The decision to present this cabin to the Historical Society was really the best decision my brothers and I ever made. It is being cared for beautifully. Continued restoration continues. Hundreds of school children go through it. People come through it every year at the Good Old Days Festival. It could never have had that attention and that kind of education to pass on to generations to come had it been left where it was. So we're grateful and thankful to this group of dedicated group of people here in Richmond, and they call themselves the Richmond Historical Society. Thank you, and come and visit the cabin. In about 1965, this building had sat vacant for 15 or 20 years without any appreciable care whatsoever. A building that age without any care really begins to decay pretty quickly. In 1965, we examined it and thought we could just put on a roof and preserve the building. Well, the more we got into it, the roof was seriously deteriorated. It had rotted a lot of logs that was subjected to rain and weather. And further examination down here at the bottom, there were logs that were not sitting on a foundation that were partially rotted just on land. They had to be, so it was determined the best thing to do was dismantle the entire building. After taking pictures and drawings, we dismantled the building, numbering each log so that it could be replaced. Then we started right from the bottom and put in a new foundation, new concrete foundation, begin to build on that. Now, there were logs that were too far rotted to be replaced, and so they were replaced by new logs cut from local timber right in Lenox and Richmond Township. Some of these, you can tell the original logs are, this one is original, this one is original, this is original, this is original. It was really some of these down at the bottom that were subjected to rotting that had to be replaced. So we were careful to have them of the same size, as nearly as they were before, be cut and measured and put in here. Along with the roof, there are unusual sized rafters inside. We wanted to be sure that we could replace everything just as closely as it was with the way it was originally built. So in the inside we had special rafters cut and sawed, put a wood roof back on it as it had been when it was originally built, and then of course you begin filling in the cracks between every log with concrete or mortar, anything that you could do, as they did when they built it in the first place. After all, logs didn't fit together. They were irregular shape, and they had to be sealed from the weather in the winter. Furthermore, the windows and doors were replaced in exactly the same spot they were when the cabin was built. It's as clear you can see from this picture before we started compared to another picture after it was completed. It's a pretty good replication of what was there originally. The fireplace, which is now protruding from the roof here, was added after the building was moved to Richmond by the Historical Society. After all, they did have a fireplace in it originally, but it was not made with the quality of mortar and stone that's available today. That's a real working fireplace. It can be used and has been used here on many occasions, and provides as close as possible the way it was originally built and housed. Just above the door and on the very top log, it may be difficult to see, but there's a metal plate about 3 inches by 7 inches long, and inside it is a large metal rod, and the plate is just to hold the rod. That goes from this side of the house to the other side, literally holding the top log in so it won't spread. This was a departure from the way the cabin was originally built, and the original construction on the top log, there were holes drilled in it from top to bottom, approximately 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter, and a wooden peg put in there, driven through there into the next log. This was to hold this structure together so it wouldn't bulge outwardly. Well, after 150 years, with the 150 winter snows on it, the weight of the snow kept pushing down on the roof, pushing out, and it literally sheared those pins off and let the side of the top of the log to bulge out and deform the exterior of the logs as well as the roof. So to counteract that, rather than putting wood pins back in, we put this rod across there, bolted it to each side of the cabin, and this holds it during any kind of snow loads that might come on it in the subsequent years. So those are a little of the things you do that to aid in the preservation of this building for a long time. So, but generally it was pretty much as it was when it was built in the 1850s. I want to read the message that's on this beautiful plaque that the Historical Society had made. It's a great message about the history of this place, and it reads like this. During the Irish potato famine in the 1840s, 1 million people fled their homeland. Most came to America. Among them was 22-year-old John Donley of Ballyporeen, County Tipperary. He landed in New York City in 1848. John leased and later bought a farm on the 29-mile road, then called the Irish Road, just east of the Gratiot Turnpike. He and 2 of his brothers cleared the land and built the log cabin. 4 generations of the Donley family lived in this log cabin and on the farm more than 100 years. During the 30s and 40s, John Donley's grandson, Hugh Donley, and his wife, Frances Gavin, and their 7 children occupied the cabin. In 1998, the Richmond Historical Society moved the cabin to this site to preserve it for future generations. Dedicated to the Richmond Historical Society by the descendants of John Donley on 8th August 1998.